Hi, so this video is going to talk about octaves. Now let's start off. What is an octave? An octave is an interval that covers one note to the next note, either above or below it. So in the musical alphabet, we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So if you have one A, that's in its octave, and then there's an A an octave above that, and there's an A an octave above that, and there's an A an octave above that, and there's also an A an octave below this one, but there aren't any instruments in the string family who can play that low. So unfortunately, I can't show you. So an octave is an interval, and it is one note to the next note above or below it. In music and bass lines, a lot of times we'll have octave jumps because that is a very common thing that has evolved over time in music to show direction. So that's just a bass line I came up with right off the bat, and I'm also using a technique that we're going to learn in this video. So octaves can be really challenging for bass players who haven't spent a lot of time practicing them because it's a very large interval. Interval being the space between the notes. And if you have, say, a D here and then a D here, that's pretty easy. We have an open string to use. But what if we're playing an E flat and we need to play this E flat right afterward? That's a pretty big jump. There's another solution, and that's to play it on the string lower. Now, you may be saying, that's a great solution for E flat, but what about other notes? And there is a universal application for a bass that's tuned in fourths. The bass is tuned in fourths, usually, G, D, A, E, and that is to play 1 and 4 across 2 strings. So let's demonstrate. We can start on a B flat in half position. So this is a note that everyone should be at least familiar with. We're in half position and we've got our first finger down. This pitch is B flat. Now if we want to play the octave above that, if we leave our first finger down, we can play 4 on the G string. Now if, say, let's pick another note. Let's do C. So we're going to put our first finger on C in on the A string, and then our fourth finger on the C on the G string. It's always going to be the same hand shape for an octave. So let's make up a little exercise. We'll start on B flat, and we're going to go B flat, C, D. Just those 3 notes, but all with first finger. So we're shifting on every single note, B flat, whole step up, C, whole step up, D. Make sense so far? If not, pause, rewind, do it again. B flat, C, D, all with first finger. Now, let's put our hand back in that original half position, and we're going to play the same notes up an octave with fourth finger. B flat, C, D. One more time, it's B flat, fourth finger, shift, fourth finger C, fourth finger D. Now, this whole time, you may have been moving your first finger around, but if you'll notice, I was doing my best to keep my hand in this position. Even when I was playing on the G string, I was keeping my left hand first finger on the A string, because I'm going to need it now. I'm going to alternate between octaves. B flat, fourth finger, first finger C, fourth finger C, first finger D, fourth finger D. So to review, it's going to be 1, 4, shift, 1, 4, shift, 1, 4. Let's do that again one more time. So it'll be B flat, 1, 4, C, 1, 4, and then D, 1, 4. So far so good? So go ahead and practice this a bunch, and if you're totally comfortable with the concept and the exercise, let's move on to a practical concern via an excerpt that was requested by one of my students. And that is from Gershwin's An American in Paris. There is a passage that goes down by half steps in octaves. So the passage goes like this. You'll probably have heard it before if you've ever heard American in Paris. That last note is arco in the piece, but just for the sake of doing this, no bow necessary. So you may have noticed that for most of that, I'm keeping the same hand shape all the way down. This requires a pretty good amount of strength and coordination, so if this seems very challenging at first, it is okay. Just practice it slowly and do your best. So the first two notes, it would be good to have the music in front of you for this, but I can teach it if you follow along. First two notes are G. So we have low G, octave G. Then we have G flat, F sharp, a half step below that. We're going to go ahead and set that up with fourth finger on the G string. Then an octave below that with first finger. The next note is a half step down, and it's going to be another set of octaves, but starting on the low note. So shift, half step down, F, F. Then we're going to shift a half step, shift a half step, half step. So the rhythm is not important when doing this particular exercise, but if you are learning the piece, do it in the correct rhythm. So what are the challenges here? The challenges are keeping the octave that you want to play in mind and keeping the notes connected so that we don't have a lot of buzzing or snapping or anything like that. And then also making sure we're doing half-step distances. So you've seen me play it a few times. What if you're still having trouble with it? Let's address the intervals first. So I would recommend practicing chromatic scale octaves. Just like the first part that we did with the B flat, C, D, you can do all half steps starting wherever, but for this example, let's start at the top. We'll go G flat, and then F, E, E flat, D. If you're counting and paying attention to which notes you're playing, you can make sure that you're on that D by playing the open D. D flat, C, B, B flat. As you go down, your hand will need to get wider. As the string lengthens, the intervals get farther apart. And as you go up, your hand will need to shrink ever so slightly as the intervals get closer together. If you imagine a guitar fretboard, the frets get closer and closer together the higher you go. So that was an example of an exercise you could do just doing half steps. Could you do it from the bottom up? Absolutely. Could you do it from the low note to the high note? Absolutely. What would that sound like? B, C, C sharp, D, E flat, E, F, G flat, and then G. In the excerpt, we play the open G because it has the timbre and the quality that we're looking for with the pizzicato instead of playing it here. But you could play it here if you wanted to keep all of the hand shapes the same. Those last few notes, I use a simpler fingering than continuing the pattern down the here, going to a different string. It's easier for me to do it here, but that's simply because that's what I've practiced. So all of this is to introduce you to octaves and to give you some practical ways of practicing them. And it's really good, this particular excerpt, the American in Paris excerpt, because anytime we practice pizzicato, we can really hear if our left hand is doing what it needs to do. With the bow, sometimes we can develop bad habits where we lift our fingers and don't keep the sound in the left hand. But as we advance and develop our sound, we really need to listen for the ring between the notes and that we're not losing notes as we change them. We'll talk more about all of this later. In the meantime, happy practicing with your octaves, and let me know if you have any questions.